Welcome to the inaugural episode of Beyond the Pages, where we explore books that inspire, challenge, and empower readers. I'm DiAngelo Thomas, and I have my three co-hosts with me. I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
You'll allow us, huh? Nice to meet you. Well, nice to be here, Mr. DiAngelo. Christopher Vallero, two-time mixed martial art champion, legit though, world champion at 170 pounds. So
I'm on his side. I'm on his side. The jiu-jitsu guy.
I'm happy to be here, guys.
I'm on his side.
This is a really beautiful topic, not an ugly topic that needs to be addressed. And it's beautiful that this the text that we are looking at really conveyed this message almost perfectly. So thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.
All right, my introduction is nothing like Chris's, right?
Cool. Thank you.
I'm not no world champion, but Briani Wallace here. Just glad to be here and, talking with my colleagues today. That's what's about it.
Awesome.
Jen Santiago, coming to you from Far Rockaway.
Nice, the Rock.
I'm on the beach right now with a book, but I'm here.
Awesome.
I'm excited.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking time out to be with us, guys. Today we're focusing on Black Girl Magic by Mahogany L. Browne. Through our discussion, we'll examine how this powerful work encourages confidence, celebrates identity, and demonstrates that stories can help shape the way we see ourselves and others. Before we dive in, I like the audience to think about this. This is a rhetorical question. Have you ever read a book that truly made you feel seen? This is what Black Girl Magic aims to do for its readers. Before we dive into the themes, let's start with the book itself. Black Girl Magic is a picture book adapted from her spoken word poem, illustrated by Jessica Snow. How do you guys feel about the illustrations in this book?
I guess I'll start. I think that the illustrations really captured what the message she was trying to portray. I really also feel that a lot of the illustrations really drew you in to like the words, right? To make the words really sink in. There's so many things that I think, especially for myself as a Black girl, when I'm looking at it, is like, it's very relatable, right? I feel like she made the illustrations relatable on purpose, right? Because you want the words to sink in. You want them to sit as if they are like words of affirmation for you. But that's just, my take. So let's see what everybody else.
Awesome. So yes, like, how do you feel about the book's layout, Chris and Jen? Like, how do you feel about it?
The illustrations I loved. I like that they have I know it looks really realistic, and for a child, it might be a little difficult to understand, but I think introducing it in this way, I know we talked about fairy tales and the need for magic, but I think in today's world, we need a little bit of reality.
Yep.
Even for younger children. So I feel like the illustrations capture the reality that a lot of us live, especially in our neighborhoods.
Yep.
Coming up in Bushwick, my mother living in Bed-Stuy, going to school in Clinton Hills, Fort Greene, living out here. This is what we see, and this is the perception that the nation does have on young Black girls. So I think it's a good thing. I think the illustration really captures that and brings it to reality.
Yep. And Chris, how do you feel about the illustrations? I think you're muted, Chris.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I think they correlated well. It was a very powerful story, and I think the illustrations, coincided respectfully and proper to its nature.
Yep. I agree. I particularly enjoy the simple colors. The book is specifically black, white, red, and gold, and those are the only colors in the book. Like, it's really, really cool that she kept it really, really simple. And with keeping it simple, it was really accessible to children. Even though the book is written for children, its message resonates with readers of all ages because it challenges the stereotypes of identity. Why do you guys think it is important for the book to be easily approachable or accessible by children? Because it's a serious topic, like Chris said before. So why do you think it's important for kids?
I mean, given today's nature, I know that usually as children, we're like, oh, we see everybody the same. yes, as children we do, but when you're influenced by your parents or your neighborhood, for example, I live in Broad Channel. When I first moved here, oh, you crazy? You moved out there? You ain't gonna. They're not gonna like you there, right? So when I came in with that notion that these people were not gonna like me. So anywhere I went, I was on go all the time, like looking at every like what you looking at, until I started to really get to know everybody out here. So even though it says as children, you can release kids in the park, and if they have no outside influence, they won't know that they're different from anybody else because they're treated the same. But when you have a kid that's being brought up like, no, you're white, and no, you're black, no, you're not supposed to like this kid. You got to stay away from them because they're like this and they're like that. And now when this kid interacts with someone like that for the very first time, what's the first thing? Why does your hair look like that? Why do you dress like that? Why do you look like that? So I think it's important for this book to be out there and for these young black girls to read it, because now it's like when they're encountered with like, oh, why does your hair look like that? They already know that the world, some people will perceive them in that manner.
Mm.
So I think it's just going out there with reality so that it's not such a shock. And I think, with a lot of kids, I know with the bullying, my aunt had her nephew who committed suicide at the age of 8
Wow, sorry to hear
from
that.
being bullied by his teacher, right? He was mixed, black, Spanish, and white, and the teacher just treated him like he was completely nothing, and his parents didn't listen. He felt he had no outlet. And I think it was because of that where, yeah, you're going to be loved by everybody. And then when you're treated differently by somebody, it's such a shock that if nobody's there for you to talk to, it's an emotional and mental shock. And then it drives kids to kind of isolate themselves.
Yeah.
And not want to. I think it's really important for this to, for everyone to know how the world perceives you, even if everybody doesn't perceive you in that manner.
I agree. So Chris, as you mentioned before, you said that this is an ugly truth that needs to be stated. I'm paraphrasing what you said. So why do you think this book is important to be easily accessible for children to learn about this topic?
Just that statement alone is so important. Book accessibility to kids, us being Americans, especially New Yorkers. You know what? I really don't know the situation of libraries to other states and whatnot. Point of the story, we're fortunate that in our city, we really don't know what a book, we do sometimes, a library might not have a book, but it's generally there for us, especially with the school system that we were brought up in. They were real hands-on making sure we were exposed to that, but the rest of the world is not. And perhaps not every small town. So for those people that are educated, and it's important to be an alumni to expose kids to stuff of this nature, because one book can change a kid's life.
I agree. So Chris,
I know it did to me. So it's important.
I agree, Chris. So I grew up learning the library system, the Dewey Decimal System, and all that stuff. Fiction section, nonfiction section, the reference books. You can't take these books out. So I'm with you, right? So this book,
I have my first library card.
Oh,
legitimately.
Man, fun
my
fact.
Kindergarten library card. I still have it.
Fun fact.
I showed it to the lady when I renewed my last one. She was like, "I've never even seen this."
Fun fact.
Yep, I could grab it.
Yeah. So this book's accessible. It uses like children's language, and the colors are uniform. So, Briani, why do you think it's why is it important for this book to be easily approachable and accessible for children with this really, really heavy topic?
I think it should be. I think that it was created to be that way because representation really matters, right? Especially being a Black girl, right? Because they're specifically talking about Black women. You want to see yourself, right? So in creating this book and you opening this book, I see myself, right? I see what it looks like for me. Like if you could pull up the book again, there's a scene of like a little Black girl on a swing, right? These are things that I want to see for myself.
See if I can find it.
How are you going to capture that image without actually putting the illustrations in there, right? Yes, like this is me. This is how I grew up. This is me looking at myself, right? The hairstyle, the different feeling that you felt during this time, right? And not necessarily, negating any other women's upbringing before, like the Black girl. You don't know that this is an issue, right? Like Jen said, you don't know that these things are a thing until they become a thing, right? Or where you're coming to school and your hair might look differently from others, and now you got girls that might want to play in your hair, and you sitting here like, wait, I don't. This is not something that, you know what I'm saying. This is something
Right.
I grew up on,
Right.
right? I grew up, and my mom tells this story all the time, and she thinks it's the funniest thing in the world. I used to get into fights on the bus, and I only lived around the corner from my elementary school. But my mom would pride me on telling people, because I had very thick full hair, don't let people touch your hair.
Mhm.
And there were
Did I mute us?
No, Jen is
sorry,
Jen's
sorry, my son
multitasking.
intervened. Yeah,
It's
my
Okay.
it's
my
fine.
son
You're
intervened.
talking about
But
your hair is your crown, is protective, and
yes, your
yeah.
hair is your crown, right? These are things that you grow up thinking, right? But then now I have people who are touching my hair, and I didn't understand what it meant, right, at the time, right? I didn't understand what it meant to be different and from other cultures, because in my head, we're just little girls on the bus, right? Until somebody says something about your hair, until somebody says something about the way that you look, right? So I think that her creating it and making it feasible for young children to see, I think that it just makes it I think it just makes it better for the kids, especially the youth, right? The adolescents, for them to be able to actually connect with the book, right? There's this book that my mom gave me some time ago when I was very young. She was like braiding my hair. It was called "I Love My Hair." I
Mm.
didn't know anything about that, right? Until you actually look at the book, and it's a black girl on the cover with her hair looking just like mine. And now, you know what I'm saying? Those connections and
Yeah.
that type of relationship to have with literature, I think that is super, super important, because it does help shape, right, your experience in life. So
Okay.
that's just, what
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it.
Awesome, awesome. Like, we all agreed wholeheartedly. I can tell all of our answers are similar. I'm
I got
gonna
a question. What do you
yes.
think would be the first, being the nature of our business? What do you think the first age? Where do you think the first child reader is gonna feel something truly moving from it? Like, I guess you probably can't put a finger on that, but could a sixth grader read it and really read between the, like,
Absolutely.
you're gonna constantly
I think
pull
I get
stuff
what your
out of it,
question is. I think that
um
your question is basically, highlighting what I'm saying, right? Because you can read those
exactly.
words, and that is going to connect with you, because that is my experience, right? I've been like knowing all my life, right? I've seen my mom in the kitchen. She says in the book, you supposed to be, right? Because that's the language that I grew up listening to, right? I still have friends till this day who still speak just like that, right? The vernacular is still the same. So these are things that you connect with. So it doesn't seem so off and so odd now when you're connecting with the book, right? Because
Absolutely.
this is the same language. I just talked to my son the same exact way that I'm hearing it in the book, right? Or so if a sixth grader picked it up, or a kindergartner picked the book up, or even somebody with us, we're in grad school and I'm picking it up, and I'm still as passionate when I read it as somebody who would be in elementary school or middle school, right? So I do think that your question is being answered because we're doing it now.
Yeah,
That's just how I'm looking at it.
I agree. Your question is valid. So
It just crosses bound. That's how powerful it is. It's
anytime,
ready for any reader to pick it up.
yeah,
That's how great it
but
is.
generally speaking, any book you read, if you read it at two different points in your life, you're gonna look at it differently. Just like any movie you see at different points in your life, you're gonna look at it differently. Like, think about it, if you were married, if you looked at a book before you were married and look at a book after you were married, and it's a heavy topic, you'll see it differently. Same thing with the age groups. Like, someone in kindergarten can read this and pick something up, and someone who's a senior citizen can read it and pick something up. And his book is accessible to all ages. And that was a powerful question. So yes.
I also think it's based on your surroundings too. Because if your surroundings don't influence that type of thinking, some kid might read it that's not in that type of society, or they're not part of that culture, they're not part of that lifestyle, and look at it and be like, what the hell is this? And then when they show it to the parents, like a bunch of garbage. It's just a book. You know what I mean? So it also depends on that influence. And I think because a lot of adults that still think like that is because they were brought up that way, and there was no intervention there. So now they're passing on their inexperience. I'm not going to say immaturity, because it really isn't their fault. And yes, after a certain point in your life, you're supposed to be like, you know what? Maybe this way of thinking is wrong. But after looking at how the brain works, it's really not that cut and dry. So I think also it plays society. and your surroundings play a role. And I think that's where educators can step in and kind of facilitate that way of thinking for everybody, so that a child at any point in their life can open this book and see, okay, maybe this is not my lifestyle, but now maybe my neighbor Vanessa, maybe this is this what she's experiencing. So when Vanessa does come in with the new hairstyle, now maybe Susie will be a little bit more conscious and just, hey, your hair looks great. Instead of, rather than, why does your hair look like that? Why are you dressed like that? So it was, and I went to school in Clayton Hills. I went to Banneker, very fresh, brand new school. And for our 8th grade, they didn't have a graduation. It was called the rites of passage with the African wear. I never once questioned it because my mother was very open with me on, we're Puerto Rican, but our roots are African. My grandfather was a native Taino, but his family did mix with slaves when they got there. So when you look at his sisters, some of them look Spaniard. He was darker than I am. My uncle is Briani's complexion. My mother's niece is blonde hair with gray eyes. Her sister is olive skin. So, my grandmother was a complete Spaniard line. And with her, it was very taboo to be like, we're mixed with African. With her, it was like, no, we're not. And my grandfather would tell her, I hate to break it to you, but we are. And you slept with me, so now you are too. So it really depends on how you're brought up. And if that ignorance stays, it stays and it makes it difficult. But I think that's where we come in to kind of facilitate that, to kind of break that barrier.
That's perfect, Jen. It's a smooth transition because right now I want to discuss identity. So you made this very personal. One of the strongest themes in Black Girl Magic is identity. Throughout the book, Mahogany L. Browne encourages Black girls to embrace every part of who they are instead of trying to fit into someone else's expectations. Rather than change themselves to gain acceptance, they're reminded that they already have value exactly as they are. Why do you think it's important for children to read books that affirm their identities?
Because you don't really want to identify as somebody else. And I think that's a notion, that's a mistake.
Well, I would disagree, Sergeant. I would disagree that that's a mistake. I'll get back to that in the sense of it's a necessity to be able to see yourself in a story, but to be able to put yourself in someone else is another dynamic, I believe, of cognitive ability to say it's an exposure, it's a window to see. You have to see it like this, and you could possibly, in a good story, you walk someone else's steps. Again, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off that.
No, but when I say like if a mistake is like, I moved my kids to Broad Channel. The only one that was older was my daughter. So she got the experience from being around other, a diverse population. My kids were not fortunate enough to do that. Right now, it was my job to expose them outside of this neighborhood. Right? So when they came, the first couple of years, the experiences were great. And then the political climate started to change. When the political climate started to change, a lot of questions arise with just one of my kids. My daughter was very open. Again, she was always around a very diverse population. My oldest son didn't really see anything wrong because he fits in pretty well. My middle son, not so much. You can tell he's Hispanic. So he was bothered by a lot of comments. So my son had an experience where they're on the school bus coming home, and one of the girls gets into an argument with one of his friends, and he tells her, you need to chill out because you're always rude. Like, you're always talking crap to the boys. You don't want nobody to say nothing to you. She looks at him and she says, well, you need to just go back to where you came from. He came home really upset because at that point is where it hit him. I'm different. So when he came home, I just told him, what are you upset about? Where were you born? And he's like, Brooklyn. I'm like, all right, so she told you to go back to Brooklyn, right? Because he was young. And then I had to explain to him, a lot of these people do love you. And I can say a lot of them do have genuine love for us and who we are and what we are. Some of them are just tolerant. And I say there's a big difference between being tolerant of somebody and something and then actually accepting. And I was always exposed to my mother's best friend is from South Carolina. My mother has friends from China. Like, my mother was always into that. She even says her way of cook, yes, she cooks traditionally, but she was always very open on the world, right? Because she was exposed to so many different people. And when you're not exposed, it really leaves. I didn't want my kids to assimilate to just, okay, I'm from Broad China, so I must be one of them. You're not, and you never will be. You can learn and adapt to their ways, but At the end of the day, you're Puerto Rican. Our cultures are very different. The way we do things is different. Not saying that you have to stick with that. You don't. You can always break away from that. But you always need to understand that at the end of the day, your roots are not where their roots are. So
All right.
that way, when those comments come out, oh, you don't belong here. You shouldn't be here. Go back to where you came from. When those comments come, they're prepared for that stuff.
All right, so we heard Jen's perspective, we heard Chris's perspective. So, Briani, why do you think it's important for children to read books that affirm their identities?
I think it's important because society is going to try to change them anyway, right? You're living proof of it now, right? Where Black girls are learning to accept themselves, right? Accepting that, going back to what I was saying before, your hair, right? Your hair is different. All my life, I've been told I had thick hair, right? And for me, right, it took me a long time to understand that my hair was beautiful, right? I always wanted to have manageable hair, right? Because in my head and what I grew up knowing is if you relax your hair, it'll be easier for you to be able to handle it, right? Because now it's softer and now it's straight, right? But growing up, you understand that your hair is part of your identity, right? The things that I wear is a part of my identity, right? The way that I talk is a part of my identity.
Right.
So I do think that having that sense of theme, especially in literature, is super important, especially for the young girl, the young Black girl that is reading, or anybody who is reading the book, right? Because at the end of the day, so that society is going to tell you something different. Society is going to tell you that Black is not in, right? Society is going to tell you that you don't fit in here, essentially, right? But for you as the young girl reading it, right, you need to stand firm in who you are and stand firm in knowing that exactly what you are and your upbringing and the way that you talk and the way that you carry yourself and the way that you're the women in your family, right, the experiences that they've had, all of that stuff is a part of your identity. It shapes your identity. So I do think that it's super important. And I think that it was a really good thing that she did in this book because even at my big old age, right, I'm still in my head like, you know what? Yeah, like actually, yes. Actually, what I'm doing, you know what I'm saying? It starts to resonate more, especially you take it in all over again. It's like reliving it all over again, right? Just like DiAngelo, like you said earlier, like it doesn't matter who or what age you are, you're gonna take something from it. If I read this as a young girl, it probably would have stuck with me, but didn't necessarily.
It'll stick with you in a different way. In a different way.
And now that I'm older, it's like, do you see the things that's going on now?
Right.
Actually, I take it in differently, right? So the identity portion of it, that theme in it of itself, right, is super important. And I think that because it's such a serious thing, right, you don't really acknowledge it on your day to day, but that moment that you pick up that book and you sit there and you read it and you really, let the words sink in and you letting it, really partake in, your daily walk. I think that it's super powerful. So that's just my take.
I agree with you, Briani. I also noticed that the book celebrates characteristics that's often been criticized or overlooked. Instead of presenting identity as something that needs to be fixed, the poem presented as something that needs to be celebrated. You know, that's important because children are still developing their sense of self, and the books they read can influence how they see themselves. All right, so now I'm gonna switch over to a new theme that's really important. That's part of the identity, is self-love and confidence. Another major theme is self-love. The book constantly reminds readers that their worth doesn't depend on other people's opinions, even when society sends negative messages. The poem encourages Black girls to believe in themselves and recognize their own strengths. How do you guys feel that literature can help children build confidence? Let's start with Chris. How do you think literature can help children build confidence?
Well, I think Briani just hit it on the head perfect with her statement. The ability to put yourself in a story that, for some reason, as humans, it gives something value, right? If you see something on TV or you read it in a book, it's like, wow, this is everywhere. A lot of people see it. So then that's normal, right? So now you feel like part of everything in a sense. And more importantly, when you start to get down to details of speech and kitchen situations, real stuff that happens in your home, you know, watching Goodfellas when they're making the sauce. We laugh because he's like, yo, you don't do it like that. They actually messed it up on the, like, that's a real thing. Like, yeah, I've, shaved garlic with a razor. Like, people like, you do it? I'm like, yeah, we do that. Or you crush it. So putting yourself in things, it's to give, especially a child, motivation and a feeling of worth. That alone can spark something, whether it's them to write, whether it just gives them confidence. And kids need to hear good things about themselves, and they need to be able to put themselves in something that brings out the best in them. So she did this really amazing in a true, it as true to the kitchen
Awesome,
scene.
awesome. So, Briani, Jen, any thoughts on self-love and confidence?
I think it's important. Again, today's society, social media has taken over what even women should look like. So you walk around, a lot of these young girls. Back in the day, it wasn't so much social media. It was books like True to the Game, The Coldest Winter Ever, where this girl comes from the gutter and now she, starts boosting and dating drug dealers.
Shout out to Sister Soldier,
and all that stuff. And it kind of, even though in the story itself, it kind of shows what that lifestyle did to this girl. Some girls might miss the mark, right? It's a chance I'm willing to take so I can look fly. It's a chance I'm willing to take so I can make this money. And I think social media now is reverting back to that when we were kind of trying to break away from that, right? We were looking at different pathways to do things that were greater with our lives. And here comes social media, where if you don't have a BBL, you ain't it. If you don't look like this, you ain't it. If you ain't got this color eyes, if you're not wearing makeup, you're not it. So I think it's important for these books to capture these, these populations, these young readers, to kind of show you don't need to do all of that, right? This is what you need to know, that from the minute you were born, you were destined to be great. You don't need this, you don't need that. And I think social media and literature is like, they're the two rivals right now, with social media really winning. You see girls 12, 13 years old doing these stupid, you kidding me right now? Doing these stupid dances and stuff, and and showing bodies.
See, grown-ups doing it in the middle of the street.
I'm doing double dutch, right? I was playing handball. I'm doing all these different things. And when I was reading The Sister Soldier, I'm like, oh my God, like a friend of mine is doing this, and the third. This is where she can end up. Right, so that I was looking at it like that. She was looking at it. Well, I'm it right now. I'm fly. So I think it's really important for these books to revert back to what Black Girl Magic is doing, is to remind these girls, you are beautiful the way you are. You are strong the way you are. You're destined for greatness, regardless of how society sees you. So I think it's, with our digital age, I think it's really important for these books to kind of, attack these vulnerable populations.
I agree, Jen. Like, social media is a huge impact on these kids' life. Briani, what are your thoughts on self-confidence, or self-love and confidence for children?
I feel like generally highlighted it most. I think that it's super important. Everything for me, I guess, is going to be an experience that I could share, because relating to the book, self-love is super, super important. I always grew up I was always the tiniest one. I was always the skinny one. I was always the one where I was always a little different from my counterparts, right? I have friends who were thicker than me. I had friends who were, it was a lot, right? And growing up, if I didn't have the type of representation that I had, right? And even if I didn't have like literature, right? Because I feel like I remember growing up thinking like, oh my gosh, to myself, right? Never like outwardly, but to myself, like, why am I so skinny? Or why I can't do this? Or how am I supposed to do it? Right? And then I grew up and I realized that this is just who I am, right? I looked at pictures of my mom. My mom would like reassure me every time, reaffirm like you are enough, right? You are what it is, right? And so some young girls don't have that in the household, right? So literature definitely is like the second source, right? For you to be able to do. Now, if we're in school and you're introducing this book to somebody or introducing this book to
Exactly.
some young girl who does not know, right? You don't have that at home. So let me pour into you here, right? I do feel like Jen said, social media is doing a number. It is doing a huge number on society as a whole, but on Black women as a whole, right? I feel like there was always this competition within ourselves, right? You know, a competition within our community alone, right? Where you had to be the it girl, right? I have to be it because society tells me that I'm never gonna be it, right? Society is telling me that the Victoria's Secret model looks this, right? Until they then like put out, okay, now there's a Black model. I've never, whoa, what is this about? Oh, wait, hold on. She's not
Tyra.
slim. The model is thick. Wait a minute. This is society is changing, right? Society is
I don't know
changing.
who in their right mind ever gave that model look like the pinnacle of a woman body. Like
It's
never
society,
like
right?
to each their own. Everybody's beautiful, right? To each their, but
But that's
anyway.
from a male's point of view, right? Because for you, you're thinking, who told you that, right? But as a woman, it is always perceived. You're always looked at a different way, right? So from experience, men don't, and I'm not saying all men, right? But if a skinny girl walks down the block, you don't hear anything. If a girl with more body in other places walks down the block, is different, right? And so you always have that not me, right, per se, because now I love everything about myself, right? So self-confidence is amazing, but for people whose everyday walk isn't that, right? Or if you didn't have that or you weren't poured in that way, how, you know what I'm saying? How else are you going to be able to receive that? Society is telling you something on the one end, and then you have another end where it's like, well, am I or am I not, right? So having these type of books, right, having this type of literature is super important, because if you just picked up the book and read it and understood that within yourself you are the all, right? You are him, you are her, right? I think that right there in itself would help shape the world, just even in the slightest, right? Especially because society wants the different races to feel how they feel, right? Because who am I to tell you anything?
Agreed 100%. Well said, Briani. I'm gonna make a conscious decision to not comment on when women walk by what guys say.
Right.
I'm gonna make a decision not to comment at all.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move the conversation along. So I know we talked about identity, and and Chris and Jen had difference of opinions in seeing identity in the book. But let's talk about representation as a theme. Representation is another important theme. When children see characters who look like them, share similar experiences, or celebrate their culture, it sends a message that their stories matter. That can make reading feel really important and really engaging. So the question to us is, why does representation in a children's literature matter for all students, not just for those who share the character's main background? So I'm gonna let Chris take the lead on this. I know you were speaking about looking at through.
I think all right, great. So again, I'm not gonna I'm gonna commend Briani giving the perfect this story to her understanding as an embodied truth of life girl that went through this, down to the verbiage. So now I'm going to give another perspective of putting yourself in someone else's, might be a little off topic, but some of my favorite characters and many people's when guy talking about, in a movie, not so much books, but some of them came from books. For example, Apollo Creed was the guy I modeled as a little kid. I was obsessed with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But when I saw Apollo, I was like, everything about him, I was like, I want to be like Apollo. I was like, I like his body. I like how he fought, like everything about him. Like, and he had character, right? He had this charisma. That's another thing that like you could throw in there that people don't point out about American history. It's been said in some like I've heard it before, but how most of America would embody like the pinnacles of cool were never labeled like the coolest black guys on TV. Yeah, people would mimic that. But it was a different Mr. T. He was the epitome of a tough guy. Like these were I like they meant something to me. Whether playing sports for guys is big with and well for everybody, but for me in my life, having diverse friends was through sports. I grew up on Church Avenue. It was a neighborhood crossing over, so I was fortunate to have friends on the block that were all different. Black, white. It was Italian. It was a melting pot, right? But they were most importantly good families, and it starts in the home. Getting exposure to having good schools, education. So again, back to bringing it on the diversity of putting yourself uh, in the stories, seeing characters like you. I believe it's just as important to see others, but you need to be able to see yourself. And there wasn't that, and she did this perfectly, as I stated before.
Well said. Well said. Well said.
And I pity the fool.
I pity the fool.
Pity the
I'm a
fool.
huge Mr. T
Bro,
fan
Mr. T
as
was
well.
the coolest guy ever.
Huge. I like the
Mr.
Rocky.
T was the man.
I like the Apollo Creed who coming out with his red, white, and blue all-American getup.
There is no tomorrow.
Yeah. I love it.
There is no tomorrow.
I love it. All right, so what do you guys? How do you guys feel? Is representation important in a children's book?
I think that it is. I think that it's super important, especially for anybody reading it, right? Because then you get to see or understand, in a sense, what the other person is going through, right? I think that it's important, even if if we were in a classroom and there was different races, right? Then it's like, oh, I didn't know that this was something that you experienced, right? Or then it becomes, well, this is something that I relate to as well, right? And then this is how you build those type of relationships, right? This is how you set apart those people from the world, right? Where you have, like Jen was saying before, like if your upbringing is one way, right, and you only have this one way of thinking, if it were different where everybody sat down and we all read books about ourselves, right, or about the other person, then it would make things a little bit different, right? You would see the world as everybody. We're not necessarily the same, but we do experience some of the same things, right? I didn't know that it was affecting you in this way, right? And so now I better understand why you walk the way that you walk, the way that you talk, the way that you react to certain things. Now I understand it's more clear, right? So I do think that it's super important because even like Chris was explaining, like he got his sense of wanting and character from watching somebody else, and now it's like, oh my God, like like for you to be able to even relate to something different, right? Even if it's somebody from another race, this is what the world is supposed to be. We're supposed to be as one in a sense, but there is this type of separation. But I do think that having that type of literature for all children to be able to read is super important, because now you guys can basically understand, or not even fully understand, but you get like a peek or like a little window into looking at what a small part of my life is like, right? Without you having to actually enter into my home to see it.
Awesome. Jen, you agree or you disagree with what's going on?
I agree.
All right.
I agree. Representation is important, especially that it helps create empathy. And I think empathy is something that children today lack. And you can see it because they even lack empathy for themselves. Working with high school students, at some point, some parents just walk away. I can't do nothing from. I had a parent tell me my kid ain't gonna be nothing but a thug. This kid didn't have the qualities and characteristics that it takes to survive in the street. I told them, well, your kid, you're not even gonna be fortunate to see him in jail. He's going to end up dead because he doesn't have that. And I would be really honest with my kids. And they'd be like, oh, how do you know? And I'm like, I lived the life. Just because, and I think that's what people don't understand about New York City. We have, your African American community, you have your Hispanic community, but we have something different. We have urban culture where we're just all thrown in here together. So yes, Latinos have their way of doing things. Black people have their way of doing things. Jewish people, but in New York, we kind of live the same life.
Yep.
We share a lot of the same things. So,
Yep.
when you go to a neighborhood where it's, you don't see that diversity, becomes a different thing. And when you show that empathy, even though we're from two different sides of the street, you start to feel like, damn, we didn't even grow up the same, but she understands what I'm going through, and it kind of leads to that self-esteem where these kids have low self, and you can start to rebuild that. So having that representation is different because it does give us access to, like, my kids. I've never had an issue with any of them, but it's because I come to them real. And they're like, why are you like this? I'm like, because I already lived what I needed to live. I suffered what I needed to suffer. I cried what I needed to cry. I saw what I needed to see. And now I'm here to make sure that that I can pass on what I learned so that you guys don't make the same mistakes. And I always make sure to tell them that there's a lot of things I learned from my students that I didn't know for myself. Again, I grew up in Bushwick. I had the Latin Kings around the corner, drug dealers upstairs, the feds running through my door to get upstairs while we're standing there, hands up, guns drawn. We ain't doing nothing, but we had to experience that. I had the girls come around the block and tell my mother, I need your daughter to put Vaseline. There's a girl I can't hit. She's a lot younger. Your daughter got to do it. It was either I do it or I was next. You know what I mean? So when you see these things in the book and now you're living these things, I could have passed on the same culture to my kids. Oh, she's talking smack to you, get in there, go get your friend. But instead, I read the books. I read all these, the gangster stories, the urban stories. I read, you know, I didn't read a lot of stuff that was empowering because there wasn't a lot available at the time to us. Yes, we had a lot of Maya Angelou, which I used to love, a lot of Langston Hughes, Ezra Jack Keats, and those were my escapes. But then once I put the book down, I'm back outside and everybody's throwing up their set and everybody's dealing drugs. You got the drug dealers
I
trying to
got a
get the funds
question for
coming.
us when we
So it's I think that allows us to push empathy and bring that back into society because these kids don't have any.
I agree with you totally, Jen. The last thing you said was we didn't have those type of books when we grew up. For many years, children's books didn't always include diverse perspectives. Black Girl Magic helped address that by placing Black girls at the center of the story, celebrating their experiences rather than treating them like secondary characters. But I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight one of the points you mentioned, that New York City is a melting pot. We have so many different races and backgrounds and socioeconomic statuses. But when I think about melting pot, right, I think about like a soup. So everything is blended up. So you have like one nice flavor. But when I look at New York City, I look at it like a salad. So everything is distinct. You have your lettuce taste one way, your tomatoes taste one, your onions, the dressing, the croutons, the cheese. So everything tastes different. Like a melting pot, I know it's the common conception, it's a melting pot, but it's like a soup. Like everything is just together. But a salad is like everything is so diverse, and everything is so vibrant. Way back in the days, New York City, the whole thing was to assimilate. So everyone looks the same, sounds the same, but that's not the case anymore. But Chris, you said you had a question to pose to us.
Yeah, just so through experience of partners, let's say, and then cultures that Jen was touching on it, the idea of colorism over racism, right? And not that she focused on racism all, but more so what came to mind to me. I told my girlfriend about this, and my girlfriend's Dominican. And she said something the other day about genetics, whatever. And I was like, babe, you're Dominican, but you're from Africa. I'm like, you're from Africa. And she's like, yeah, but I was like, so you're going to come up 90 something percent at okay, somewhere down the line, there was a split because your mom's a lot lighter. But from what you're telling me, I saw a picture of your dad. I don't think your dad had anybody split. Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter. What matters is she started to tell a story like anytime they would go to to the capital of the city, whenever they had to go to certain places, even in Dominican Republic, all of a sudden they were in the government jobs. It's all light-skinned Dominicans. I found this really interesting because my girlfriend before that was Brazilian, and it was the same exact thing. And I was like, I have that understanding. So again, I'm correlating it to a little girl in those countries, and it's like print that book in Portuguese and drop it in the middle of Minas Gerais, and that little girl's gonna correlate to this. Why? Because it's so broad that colorism is even a bigger factor, I would say, than racism. Just through this human condition, it's you're different. You're different. All right, who's got the upper hand? Who is here longer? Who has to like? It's I would say a sad condition of, right? If somebody doesn't put their foot down, if you unfortunately have ignorant parents and you're conditioned to a society, a household, you're a product of your environment, right? So that's why we have to choose to be bigger people. But anyway, the colorism was like, I was like, interesting. That I was like, this is the same thing in a different place. And I was like, not in America. I was like, I actually had to look up the term. Like once I started to do some research, I saw colorism. I was like, that makes sense, Chris.
Yeah.
So I just want to know what you guys thought about that,
Yeah,
or if you thought about it.
Yeah. So
Unfortunately, my mother experienced that with her own mother. And my mother was the darkest of, her siblings, especially there. She got sick over time, and when she came here, her, complexion started lighting up with all the medication. Afro, couldn't brush through her hair, right? And my grandmother she asked, obviously, they kind of hashed out, their differences. Luckily, they did, and they were able to have a better relationship. I love my grandmother, miss her to death, and she learns from her mistakes, but she did make my mother's life miserable because my aunt, soft hair, very light skin, very slim. Everybody called her beautiful. And my mother, they used to call her prieta, which is dark skin. My father calls her that now because it's a term of, that's his nickname for her. That's his woman. But my grandmother used to use it in the sense where, la prieta de aquí, the darkest one here. My mother was the one at 9 years old.
Derogatory, yeah.
Bedpan. My mother was the one cooking before she went to school. My mother was the one walking barefoot. When my grandmother was dying, my mother was the one making sure that everybody ate. She was the one doing everybody's laundry. But every time things went wrong, my mother was the one that got beat. And she got beat for it every time because she was the darkest of all the girls. All my mother's sisters were very, very white. Very white with soft hair. My mother was the one with the red throat and, the darker complexion. So I like that you touch on that because colorism existed, especially in Puerto Rico, within families themselves. There's been families that disown. My father's family, they're all native. They're short, that native hair, dark skin. My father's the lightest of all his siblings. They never had an issue. There's never been a conversation, but when it came to my grandmother, and my grandmother didn't learn until she met my mother's best friend, Sharon, who was from South Carolina. And she, they had a conversation about it. And Sharon explained to her that, even among her family in South Carolina, if you were darker than Sharon was, they treated you bad too. So I think it exists in a lot of ways. And I think it comes from that, not having that self-awareness, not having the literature enough to know that it's okay to be dark. It's okay to be light. It's okay to be, to have a fro. It's okay to have curly. My mother's hair is like curly. Like you can't tell my mother, I can't, she told me to straighten my hair. I can't get a comb through it. What do you want me to do? But that's the way she's always been. And she hated herself for it for a very long time. My mother didn't go to her high school graduation because of it. She, she turned away from everything she could have been. She ended up in the kitchen taking care of us. And, she doesn't regret it, but that's why she always made sure to always remind us, it doesn't matter what anybody says to you. I didn't have the literature, I had my mother and my father to tell me, you can do whatever you want. Nobody can tell you that you can't do anything.
That's right.
I made a lot of stupid mistakes because I didn't believe that I could have done it because it's not what I was seeing at the time. And it happened when it happened, right? I came to my senses when I came to my senses. And I think better late than never. But I think it's important that we have literature like this to attack those issues now and make sure these children know that they are enough and that they can accomplish and conquer the world at a very young age, rather than waiting until they're in their 30s trying to figure it out.
Exactly. Briani, any thoughts of colorism?
Yes, actually. It reminds me of one of the other articles that we had, the color white, complexion dark. Basically the article was basically saying that, you know, how your race, your skin color, the culture, beliefs, all of that, you know, basically shapes your identity, right? And this is all that what, you know, ties into what we're talking about. But it also like relates to my personal experiences. Like my skin is like a caramel, right? My little brother is darker than me. My older brother is lighter than all of us, right? My older brother is probably Chris's complexion. He is still black.
I'm the lightest one in my family by far.
Right. So here's the thing, but it's crazy because, you know, people will treat you differently just because your skin tone is different, right?
Yeah.
They don't think that we're all related because we all have different skin tones, right? And you know, people are prejudiced to people who are darker, right, of darker tone,
So
or
crazy.
you know, things like that. And it's so crazy because in my like experience, right, in life, people used to tell me all the time, like I'm light skinned. I used to be like, what the hell is that? Like I'm brown, right? Because if I colored brown lightly, right, it still would be my shade. If I used a crayon and like just dug into the paper, the brown would be a little bit darker, right? So what does it matter if my skin was a little lighter on the brown side than it is on the darker side, right? I am still black. I am still brown. So it's so crazy because like, hi, that is my beautiful chocolate son, right? So it's so crazy because like, you know, I have been
chocolate son.
Oh,
So I agree with what
You got
Briani-
caramel in you, kid? I like caramel.
You're mute.
I'm on
so
mute.
just tying it up into a quick. He said he's a handsome boy. He's handsome and brown is what he's trying to tell everybody, and I love that for him, right? But
That's right.
I have family members where I had a little cousin where 2 seconds. Okay, talk to me in a second. I have a little cousin she's darker, right? She's darker than her siblings, and it's crazy because my aunt spilled out the same complexion of kids, the same way my mom's complexion of kids is. So her young son is light, and I mean he's probably maybe Chris's complexion or maybe a little bit lighter. He's still black. His father is as dark as dark can be, right? So he's light. My middle cousin is the darker. Yes, in 1 second. And then there's my one cousin who's like me, and we had to pour into my younger cousin who she sometimes would feel like she was ugly because she was just darker, and we had to explain to her like all black is beautiful. You are beautiful. Do you see yourself? Like, do you see who you are? And she had to, it took her now, and she's 18. It took her a couple of years to settle into her beauty and understand, like, you know, my skin is a part of me. It's my identity, right? It helps shape who I am. And now she walks around like she's in a ray of sunshine every time I see her, right? So I do think that you know, this thing of complexion and who's lighter and who's dark, that all of that ties into everything, right? And then I think that when, you know, literature definitely shapes a lot around it and pours into students in that way, I think that also helps shape how their identity is and how their experiences are.
I agree 100%. I'll try to move us along because we're coming in on an hour, so I'll comment really briefly. So as an African American, it was instilled in us since way back in the day. You had house slaves and you had field slaves, right? In order to be a house slave, I mean, you worked in the house, but in order to do that, you had to pass something called the litmus test. So what the litmus test is they picked up a brown paper bag, and if you were lighter than a brown paper bag, right, you passed the litmus test, right? Otherwise, you didn't pass it, and that was true for a lot. So as Jen was saying, in Puerto Rico, I think Chris was saying in Dominican Republic, most of the government jobs were held by lighter skinned people.
And listen, I've been told this. I don't have any facts, but
Right,
I've heard this from multiple,
Yes,
it happens in Cuba. I heard it. It said,
right.
Seems that it happens everywhere. It's like, what the?
But from my anecdotal experience, growing up, going on job interviews, the lighter you are, the more success rate you had in getting the job, right? First of all, getting in the door as a minority
So it
was
still
huge.
correlates. The lighter you are,
100%, 100%.
Yeah, okay.
And then most of your coworkers you see are, you know, of the lighter complexion, right? Very rarely back in the day you saw like a dark skin person in power or in charge and stuff like that. So, and it's because it's a negative connotation. Like a light skinned person is more softer, more soft spoken. But then the opposite, right? I'm a huge basketball player on the basketball court, right? So all things being equal, well, the athletes, you know, you want the darker person on your team. Like if you're picking and choosing, this is just how the stereotypes work, right? It's how
It
it
just
works.
makes it better.
This
How he's darker, he's better.
That's how it
Okay.
works, right? So but this is it's huge, right? So we can talk about that specific thing for an hour, but I'm going to move us along just a little bit. Amazing question. We have two more themes to discuss, so I'm gonna try to be brief. Resilience. I also think resilience is one of the book's most powerful themes. The book recognizes that life can include obstacles, stereotypes, and moments of self-doubt. But instead of focusing on those challenges, it emphasizes perseverance and inner strength. As teachers, what do you guys think resilience looks like in a classroom?
Oh, I think that.
Adapting and surviving.
I was about to say the same thing. Literally just I think resilience is being able to accept, right? So accepting and adapting, right? And basically, you know, pushing yourself to beat those odds. That's just what it is, right? We, especially for all four of us, I think we teach special education, no? So teaching special education, we already have to deal with the odds, right? The odds that your kids are not going to pass the regents, your kids are not going to pass the state exams. Oh, what are you going to do? How are you going to make it easier for them when in reality they're not asking for the world to give it to them easy. They're asking you to just treat them as if they're still people, right? And so them actually beating the odds shows that resilience, right? Showing that they were capable of doing it. So that in itself, I think, is resilience.
Yes, just recovering positively when they facing, these kids. I had a student this year that was shot, point blank range. He survived, right? And in between, prior to him getting shot, we saw the spiral and we knew where it was going. This kid was bright as can be, right? And there was one day that I asked him, "You okay?" He said, "I just need a hug." And when I hugged him, I'm like, "You sure everything's all right?" And he said, "Everything's gonna be okay now because I needed that." And it's something like, you know, he stepped away for a while, then he gets shot. After he got shot, it took a while for him to come back. Emailed the parents, went back and forth. Eventually, he came back, right? And he started to kind of just try and refocus. That's not an easy. I've gotten into fights where I've gotten jumped, and I always tell my kids, you guys, I tell you guys these things. It's not that these things happened and then I went upstairs. I was upset for the moment, but then I had that moment of this could have went. Somebody could have gotten hurt. Somebody could have went to jail. Somebody could have died. And you start thinking about that later on. But to see him coming back from being shot, to come back to school and just showing up is half the battle. Leaving your house after that, when you know it was somebody in your neighborhood that did it, and that it can happen again. Right? So that's resilience in itself. And when I told him, he said, "I'm going to fail anyway," I said, "You survived, and you stepped out of your home, and you stepped foot right back into school. That's resilience. You're showing strength. That aside from facing what you just faced, you're willing to come back and continue to fight for what you want to do, right?" And I always tell my kids, I'm very straight up with them. You guys are from Rockaway. We're minorities. The world doesn't expect anything from you. And a lot of the other teachers who are not from the same walk of life don't. How can you talk to them like that? I'm like, because I was there. I'm from Bushwick. I had a teacher tell me I was going to be nothing but a drug dealer in my face. I never used
Wow.
drugs. I was never caught with drugs in school. My parents were on drugs at the
No,
time.
pigeonholed you just right like ignorance.
I told
Just straight
her, "You
ignorance.
better hope I never make it because you'll be my first target." Like that was my initial reaction. But what gave him that? It was the fact that I was Puerto Rican, living in Bushwick. That's what I see, right? That was his perception of me. It wasn't anything that I did. I was never caught with anything. So I always tell my kids, if you hate the way society looks at you and what they think of you, are you happy that this is what they see you guys as, just thugs and rappers and wannabe gangsters? That's not what you are, right? But you need to start here. and you take here to either leave and change your surroundings, or you take that and you stay here and you change what you want Rockaway to be. So I think it's just really important to have resilience in literature to show these kids that they can adapt anywhere, they can survive anywhere, and they can recover positively even when faced and with a negative situation, just like my student.
Yep,
You know,
true, Jen. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. So, Chris or Briani, any thoughts on resilience? How does resilience look like in a classroom?
I got something. I'll let Briani speak if she'd like to. First.
I pretty much gave you mine, right? The resilience of, with the special education.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, so Chris?
So you were asking us as teachers?
Yes.
The resilience now?
Yes. Us as teachers.
So I'll touch on that. I just want to once again,
Chris, towards the children though, what does resilience look like in the classroom for the children?
Exactly. So not as a teacher for our resilience,
right?
Children's. Exactly.
Yes, not our resilience.
So yes, and again, so it is at the highest severity of importance. It has to be there for all children, right? And Black Girl Magic, it's the first. I think it's the first book that did it like this. Well, at least that got the prestige that it deserves. It's about empowerment and the fact that these young Black girls have grown into these strong Black women that have oftentimes been single moms, working, putting the whole family on their back, and then doing it, and that has to be recognized. And if this book can help any young Black girl that is down, because everybody gets down at certain points in their life. Life's a roller coaster. It's hard to find motivation, and a little piece of something like this can stick with a kid to keep going, and that will create the resilience. And unfortunately, sometimes you run out of steam, right? And you could be down in the dumps and you see that book on your shelf, literally, and you're like, oh, that helped. I'm like, you pick it up, and all of a sudden you find something else that, all right, this is why I'm going today. So it really should, really needs to be able to be accessible to any little kid that wants it. And it has to be paid the respect it deserves. So well done for Black Girl Magic poem.
Absolutely. What stood out to me is that resilience is shown as pretending a problem doesn't exist. It's not shown like that. Instead, it's shown you have to believe in yourself and keep moving despite those challenges. The message can encourage young readers to develop confidence that when they face difficulties and challenges or in school. All right, so I want to move us along. Last topic, last theme, empowerment. Chris touched on empowerment a little bit. The final theme is empowerment. The title itself suggests that every Black girl possesses something special. The book doesn't portray empowerment as something that comes from someplace else or someone else. Instead, it encourages readers to recognize the strength and the potential they already have inside of them. How can teachers empower students through the books they choose?
I could speak real quick. I teach history. So there are a lot of times where a lot of the, historical topics are based on our students and their culture, right? So Haitian independence, Harlem Renaissance, right? These are things that you can depending on what the articles are that you're choosing for said topics, right? Those are things that help empower your students, right? A lot of growing up, we had jokes about Africans and Haitians and all this type of stuff, right? But then now, it's amazing to see the youth, right, especially in the school system, embracing their cultures and who they are, right, and do it unapologetically. So I think that it's important when you choose whichever articles or books that you're teaching to your students, because whatever you pour into them, they're going to intake, right? It is all a part of their experience, and it's all a part of their school experience, especially because there are things like, Jen, you remember the negative things that they told you about in school, right? But why not be that change, especially as a teacher? Why not be the person who pours the good into them, right? I don't want to be the teacher who told my student that you're never going to make it. I want to be the one who told my students that because of who you are and where you came from and what your family had to do and what your ancestors had to go through and the things that they had to pour into the world. I want to be them. I want to be that person, right? So I think that it all depends on the type of person that you want to be as a teacher for your students, right? Who do you want to be remembered, right? In the school, what do you want your students to remember about your class specifically, right? What was different about your class, right? So you chose these great books, these great articles that connected with your students, because cultural response is really what you want when you're in the classroom, right? You want them to be able to relate, you want them to be able to connect with the readings, or they're not going to be engaged one, or they're not going to want to participate, they're not going to think that anything that you're doing is relevant, right? So I think that it
Agree.
is super important that you choose whichever articles or books that you're using for whatever it is that you teach, right? That makes sure that it connects to the livelihoods and the experiences of your students so that they have something to connect to.
Well
I
said.
agree with that. Also, I was teaching global history, and one of the hardest things I think I had to do was introducing the harder topics. One of the things I always found fascinating was that King Leopold was never really a big topic for anybody, right? When I was in global, when I was a kid, it was touched on very briefly, and then we spent months on just the Holocaust. And I know there's a lot of ground to cover when it comes to that, but when speaking atrocity, we need to give everything equal representation, right? So that we can see that it happened across, not just in one specific place. So introducing, topics like that. And when I did, and I knew it was gonna be rough, so I did disclaim in the beginning, like the things we're gonna see, these are actual images taken with pictures. These are actual people. These are people that were there and experienced these things. And I saw that by doing that, even though it was the ugly side of history, it also introduced what people did in the world to address these atrocities, right? It brings these things to the forefront and puts these kids in the shoes of someone who is bothered by these things. And I made it seem so now you're in the Congo, you're an imperialist, right? A European imperialist. What would you do in this situation? Would you support this because, you guys need the, the material that they're extracting from them? Or would you put a stop to it because it's inhumane, and you see the different perspectives and you start challenging that, right? And it also puts them in the sense where this is wrong and this is what I would do to try and fix these things. So now when they go out into the world and they start to see injustices, and I think that's what leads to people out in the streets now protesting a lot of the things that are happening, right? They were exposed at one point or another to these real world issues. Somebody empowered them to look at, all right, we're not just going to look at these things that are building us up, but let's look at people that are being broken down and what was done to bring them back up. How can you be a part of pushing these people back to where they need to be, right? And support them. So I think it's really important
That's
to
right.
have that and to touch on those hard topics as well.
I agree, Jen.
I agree.
I also think empowerment in this book means finding your own voice. The poem encourages readers to speak confidently, dream without limits, and recognize that they belong in spaces where they may not always feel represented. So we're wrapping up right now. We touched on a lot. We spoke about the actual book, the layout, the colors. Spoke about the background. It used to be a spoken poem. We touched on many themes, right, including identity, representation, empowerment, resilience, self-confidence. We discussed a lot. We've been talking for over an hour. You guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Sure.
We need to see more of this. I would love to see more.
We would love to see more books like this.
I would love to see more books like this.
Yes, I agree.
In my opinion, I do think that our professor introducing us to this, especially in grad school, I think that it was something that was pivotal, and I think that this is something that she should continue to do, right? Because it brings up these conversations, right? It helps you think about how you're going to be more inclusive, especially when you get back into the classrooms, right? So I do think that this was something that was super important to do, and even with looking at, I know that we're not talking necessarily about the class by itself, but just thinking about it like right now as I'm sitting here, looking at all of the readings that she assigned, right? We just talked about how are you going to make literature, connect with the students in the classroom. it's so crazy because I'm looking at all of the books. I have all of them. How they
And
all
ding, ding,
connect.
ding, ding.
How they all
Ding, 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 ding,
connect
ding.
to somebody's experience or somebody's possible experience, right? In the classroom. American Born Chinese. Who the F cares? Let's be honest in a cap. Like this is so it's amazing, right? This is something
Not a
that
coincidence.
that
Well
you
done,
want. It's
Professor.
not a coincidence, right? You know what I mean? And I think that the themes of this book as a whole, this theme itself, it's still highlighted in all the other books that she chose. So I thought I think that was
Yeah.
was done purposely. That was
Yeah.
amazing. I think
Yeah.
that was amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Briani, and Jen. In closing, I'd like to pre-justice, right? We see pre-justice is going on repeatedly all throughout the world, different countries, same thing, right? It's again part of the ugly part of the human nature, right? People trying to take advantage of each other and just causing separation. So I actually wrote a little. My main takeaway is that we should recognize both uniqueness of any types of people, right? And if we see something reoccurring as a people, like Jen was saying, right, standing up, we have to flex the power of the number and of being, you know, of the people, and being like, listen, call something out when it's not right, just call it out because everybody deserves a shot. And firsthand, I think every one of us we have a life experience that's one of your favorite experiences because of diversity, right? Whether it's a food you love and, a friend you made. So, yeah. Bringing the book to the kids, having this book in a young Black girl's hands could be the key to making that girl the best version of herself.
Yep. Yep, I agree, Chris. So Briani hit it on the head. Us reading these books at an older age makes us realize how important it is, right? For a younger age, right? You're looking at it, you're like, wait a minute, this is important, right? Can I make sure that the kids read these type of books because they need to see themselves in these type of books, right? Because maybe they were there when we were younger, maybe they weren't, but we definitely weren't exposed to it, right? It was more Dr. Seuss, Cat in the Hat, were things like that, right? So seeing like these controversial topics, right, being implemented or inculcated into kids' minds early, the earlier the better, right? Because Jen said earlier, you know how to deal with it, like once it comes up in real life. So I applaud the professor for letting us hit all these controversial topics. Even like you were talking about American Born Chinese, but this one right here, Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School. I went to a Catholic high school, right? So I'm like, whoa, like this, like she's really hitting home on many, many points. So I applaud the professor. Like Jen said, I do want to see more. So as a conclusion, that's all for today's episode of Beyond the Pages. We hope our conversation gave you a deeper understanding of Black Girl Magic and why this book matters, not only for children who see themselves reflected in these pages, but for anyone who believes literature can inspire confidence, empathy, and understanding. I'd like to thank the 3 co-hosts, and we bid you a farewell. Until next time.
Have a great day, guys.
Have a great day, guys.
Enjoy, guys.
Ciao.